probably one of the last independent newspapers in Australia. I don't know, but pretty well. And it's a free weekly, and it's kind of like our paper, the people's paper.
The Echo is an integral part of our community. It gives the community a chance to spread what they have an opinion on, and we can all have a listen.
Great articles, great contributors that really seem to span the width and breadth of today's society.
No, I sort of every Tuesday I rush to grab my copy of The Echo, and I think it's just that it's really representative of the local community.
It isn't owned by a huge media group, so so that the editorial has a lot more freedom rather than determining what shareholders or managing directors think.
They probably get more of the alternate view than the locals that have lived here forever view.
I certainly never got any favourable press from the Echo. Not that's a big deal, but everything I did was wrong.
It is a paper that will take a stand, and it won't be entirely influenced by its advertisers.
And I also love their attitude to a number of subjects. They're just saying, think about it. And that's all you've got to say to people, to ask them to think.
Handy paper, very good.
My sister reads it in Scotland online, and friends on the Gold Coast, they make sure they get theirs online. You know, people just really like to find out what's going on in Byronshire, even when they're not here.
What an amazing publication. I feel guilty for not reading The Echo. That's astounding.
Now, there's probably a generation of people that have grown up with it. You know, turning 25, crikey, there are people that have probably been reading it since they were born.
The Echo in many ways is a still small voice of reason, leavened with a bit of insanity.
Nicholas and I never expected it to succeed. We were doing it because we were having fun, and basically that's how The Echo started. It was just two crazy guys.
I had this idea that we would start a newspaper, and I've been very angry with the local press ever since the 83 raids, the Operation One Up, because the local press wouldn't report it.
It was Main Arm, Mullumbimby Creek and Wilson's Creek. They were the main three areas that the
the new immigrants came, because they could get smaller blocks in those days, and whereas the people down on the flat, they were still the old farmers that had lived there for family for many years. They were interesting times. A lot of us lived in semi-legal dwellings, and that council wasn't so strict that what was available should be lived in and lived in properly. Now, of course, you can't even scratch yourself without having permission, but in those days things were pretty free.
And this place is extremely beautiful, and it was very easy to fall in love with it and to be overwhelmed by that and overlook all of the snakes and the ticks and the spiders and everything else that you have to deal with. But the people here were great.
A lot of people at that time that came in the early 80s were in fact people from professional backgrounds, pharmacists, doctors who didn't want to be doctors anymore, and some really interesting characters that really ended up in the hills behind Mullumbimby.
And the thing that struck me first when I moved up here was how extraordinarily well integrated the whole place is, how extraordinarily tolerant it is, that, you know, the redneck farmers and the transsexual bikies and the wild-eyed hippies all get on together and all tolerate each other. I mean, they argue passionately about everything, but there's no suggestion that one group owns the place and the rest should bloody well move out.
So yeah, there was a great feeling of community starting from that time.
Walking in the sunshine down on Watergoes Bay, thinking about how lucky we are to be able to play out in the surf and down on the beach, loving this life, everything's within reach, learning to love 24 hours a day. Love, love, love 24/7. Love, love, love 24/7. Beautiful people laughing and smiling all day. Smiling all day. Eyes meeting eyes, yeah, I tell you, it's feeling okay. Feeling okay. All around the world there is famine and war, ridiculous gaps between wealthy and poor. But here on the beach, we're living and loving all day. Love, love, love 24/7. Love, love, love 24/7.
That was the days when Mullumbimby magic was grown and used quite heavily in this area. We had a really active police force at that time that didn't believe in taking it nicely. They believed in hitting the nail on the head in all senses of the term and stopping it in the bud.
For 3 days, under the infamous Operation One Up in 1983, Main Arm was sealed off by the police. You had to go through roadblocks to get in, roadblocks to get out. Women and men were strip searched on the side of the road. There were police everywhere running around with guns. They shot up water tanks up at the top of Main Arm. They wouldn't report it. The police told the Northern Star and the Advocate not to report it. And so what did the Northern Star and the Advocate do? They said, yes, sir. Of course not. We won't report anything until it's all over. So there we were, bailed up Biggest bloody story in Australia probably that week. Bailed up in Main Arm with police blocks, you know, to go in and out of, and every time, and be abused, let me tell you, every time. Out the car, hands on the roof, search the car, defect notices, just to go into town and do the washing. You know, I mean, it was just bloody outrageous. And the press wouldn't report it.
Outside my hobbit hole, and the helicopter came over 3 times. It was a hot day, and I thought the wind, the draft was marvellous. I thought it was one of those little amenities that they put on pensioners on hot days. Then it was obvious that it wasn't. In other words, it was a bust.
I'm not proven guilty. I've been mugshots of fingerprints. I'm no criminal from the past, but not in this case. And I feel harassed. Right. I feel like a regular scapegoat simply because I got the name. Does not mean that if my neighbors grow stuff, I should be held responsible.
They can just say, look at you,
have a reasonable
you look like it's not that. That's all they've got to do, and they have total rights. They don't have to have any search warrant. That's the whole... Cop said to him, how old are you? And he said, 18. He said, are you old enough to be shot, boy?
People's property was removed. People's property was damaged. Is this true? If so, those people that suffered any loss, any physical abuse, any verbal abuse, any theft, any destruction to their property, please let us have some facts.
You only get one.
That's number one. Number two, if these facts are established, we have just been subjected to a minor version of Cedar Bay. And stuff me gently. I will not have that happen in this valley.
Department of Air and spoke to the minister concerned there about what was happening. We rang the Premier's Department and spoke to Mr. Rand's secretary. We rang a couple of other people too, who are all sort of fairly valuable people to have concern about what's happening to us. And in each case, all of these departments recommended that we write individual complaints to these different people. Right. And please write a letter to these people so that someone knows something's happening. Okay?
The states will be able to stand up self-righteously and say, oh, the drug-crazed hippies again. They deserve everything they get. I am not a drug-crazed hippie. I might have been out of my head on acid for a while, but and I'm not even a hippie, goddamn.
Hippie in the bottle means
No, what I am objecting to is the invasion of my fucking space. Me too. The invasion of my privacy. Every time they do this and get away with it, some of our liberties are chipped away, little by little.
And it becomes law.
And it becomes law, and it becomes accepted. We're a bunch of dickheads if we sit here and take it laying down.
So what's the answer, Frank?
The answer is action, but action based on fact.
Well, we've got to compile a fact of what happened.
Okay, who's best equipped amongst us to gather this evidence?
We're just trying to do that.
We're going to do it together.
My name's Nick, and I live right here. For those who know me.
Right, the Ombudsman, the Premier's Department, and the Minister for Air. We haven't got the Minister for Air's address. The Minister for Air is simply over the helicopter saying, what the fuck is that helicopter doing? Well, don't say that, but put it more politely.
Say that.
Scaring the shit out of helicopter coming over this whole area.
And I contacted the Council for Civil Liberties. They put me onto a lawyer, and if everyone would like to do a report and I can have a copy of it, I'll take it to him and say, what in this is illegal, and that's what we can stop. And if we can't do anything about it this time, we can make sure they behave next time. Because they'll come back on the dope issue. But they can't come back and fucking beat us around. Well, when they come back on the dope issue... Let's have the Ombudsman here next time, let's have the TV here next time, let's have Robert Cameron here at the roadblock. So when we've got to delineate I think the various areas which we can follow this up, and if there's going to be some measure of concerted action, it's got to take place on a continuing basis.
He'd been working as a journalist for the Lismore radio station as a stringer. That is to say, you know, you just contribute stuff as and when it happens. You ring up, you make a little couple of minutes report, and they may or may not use it on their news bulletin, and if they do, they pay you a small amount. And he was doing that. He could not get the Northern Star, his own radio station, or anybody else to even report this. And I think that was probably the really sort of, you know, the itchy thing, that he wanted to be able to tell people what was going on. And if he couldn't get it into any other media, well, he'd have to invent one.
His father was a publisher in London. I think his father published books and things. But Nicholas had the printer's ink in his blood, in his genes. He was thinking about buying the Byron News, which was for sale at the time. But when I very first came here, back in the 70s, in the middle of the main street in Mullumbimby, there was Jack Brokenshire, the one-man advocate man. He wrote and published The Advocate, and he printed it right in the shop there, and it was a beautiful thing going past and seeing this guy printing in the newspaper in the middle of the main street, you know. He finally retired, but he was a great inspiration to Nick, and I think Nick wanted to focus his editorial newspaper attention on Mullumbimby more than on Byron Bay.
My wife and I were in Brisbane, and we had a typesetting business, and we moved down to Wilson's Creek in 1984 or 5 with the intention of working remotely. Most of our clients were in Brisbane, so faxes had just been invented, and we thought we could telework from there. We did a little bit, but it meant that I had the only photo typesetting machine in the Shire, apart from perhaps the Byron News.
I think what we want to get moving here is a list of the various areas we can take action in, and draw up some sort of, for want of a better term, a battle plan.
I had no idea who he was. He was well-spoken, poorly dressed, very good-looking man. Very nice man, you know, you were warm to him.
He was very able to talk to anybody, any person from any kind of lifestyle. And he was fascinated by people too, which was very good for a newspaper man.
He knocked on the door and said, "I hear you have a photo typesetting machine. I want to start a local newspaper. What's involved?"
And between the two of them, they launched the Echo.
He was simply walking along the road in the lane with his friend Tony, and the cops nabbed them, took them up to where he lived, and where they had about 2 or 3 plants, and put him next to him, said, "Are these yours, boys?" No.
Nick Shand approached us to say, we're setting up a private newspaper, and you know, would you like to advertise? And being independent people ourselves, and we always have been, we immediately said yes, we'd love to be part of that. And they also approached Chris Mallam, who looked after the properties, because they were looking for somewhere to set up their first office and to print their sort of first editions. So it was a combination of us becoming part of their, you know, being advertisers in their newspaper, and if I remember rightly, I think we were one of the very, very first, and we took out a half page, and I think for the first few editions we were sort of the biggest advertiser, and perhaps the first couple of years certainly were one of the biggest advertisers. And then they rented premises in the renovated Mallam's building above the newsagent, and actually ran the whole Echo out of there and did the printing for a couple of years.
It would be in that folder up there. We put out the first paper in June of 1986, and it was an enormous struggle. I mean, we had weeks to prepare for that first edition, so it was a mighty 20 pages.
Yes, we had to cut and paste everything and take the photographs and produce the photographs in the darkroom. Extremely long-winded process, and to this day I still can't believe how we ever produced anything. It took so long.
It literally took us so much time that when it was out, I thought, well, that was an interesting exercise, but we couldn't possibly do it again. Nicholas didn't seem, in the least bit perturbed about having to do all that work all over again and again and again forever. Yeah, number 2. Yeah, this is the second one with a mere 12 pages. And the second issue was only 12 pages, but we persevered.
So I was a bit cynical, I have to say, about there being room for a second paper in what was then a very small shire, but I was proved wrong, although the Echo came close to bankruptcy several times during the following years.
And suddenly they had no money, and then he realised that he hadn't sent out any invoices. And yes, people had taken the advertising, but he hadn't bothered to tell them to pay him. So that was a kind of, when they began, there were some real stumbling blocks of just learning how to run a business in very basic ways.
Sure, there was all that alternate sort of side to it, and the green stroke alternate, and you call it what you hippie, whatever you like to call it, but there was still room there for us to advertise as people in town wanting to move our businesses ahead. And we had great success with the Echo in the early days in particular. We have the paper sitting on our checkouts and everybody comes in, where's the Echo, where's the Echo? So we do know it is read widely.
The Echo expressed a lot of new age opinions and new ideas and challenging ideas. It was very much in contact with the comment on the environment and what actually is happening to our physical surrounds and our physical environment.
Byron Shire is the only local government area in the whole of New South Wales north of Newcastle, which constantly votes Labor both state and federally, and voted yes to the idea of a republic. And, it has a very high Green vote, obviously.
So, yes, it's very diversified. I mean, there's little doubt that you could walk around here, and whatever your opinion might be, you'd find someone who'd back you. Although I have found it hard at times, I must say.
If I'd known what I was letting myself in for, well, who knows whether I really would have done it.
We weren't success-orientated. We weren't goal-orientated at all. It was just, it was just a thing that we have a weekly cycle. We come in on a Tuesday, we look at the paper, we say, oh my God, what have we done? That's terrible, what can we improve?
Guns are much more accurate than morals.
Now let's start selling some ads and collecting some copy, collecting some good articles and photographs, and start building it up, and on Saturday we'll start laying it down.
He just had an idealism which coincided with David's idealism, so the two of them were pretty much like the opposite of each other for a team to work. That was a very good situation, Nick was extremely outgoing and sociable, and would talk the leg off an iron pot. David was the complete opposite, very quiet and studious and methodical. So they were very good balance for each other.
Almost like good cop, bad cop. I sort of saw that scenario a little bit, because Nicholas, the sort of guy who went around to a party and would know everyone's name by the end of it and introduce himself, and he had everyone on side. And people who didn't agree with him politically, they had a respect for him because he had that ability to understand their position, I guess. My father's a little bit more less compromising on that stance.
And on Monday it'll become an absolute fever pitch as we try and put all of this stuff together, and let's get totally and utterly pissed when it's done and stay up all night fixing the world, and then blearily drag yourself in on a Tuesday to start it all over again. I mean, the idea of it being, connected to a goal.
Hearing she was getting very defamatory. I mean, if you ever got hold of a recording of her, you wish she was calling him names. She's saying, this disgusting man.
You've got to do some pretty serious stuff to be defamatory. You've got to call him a cross-dressing, corrupt little weasel. That might do it.
You know, what started as a business arrangement turned into the most important friendship of my life.
I lived right next door to Nicholas and Jan on the community that they set up, and right from the outset we became really close friends. You know, the Echo was born on blood, sweat and tears. It was hard yakka, and there was a skeleton crew running it. Nicholas and David, Wendy Lovejoy, Carol Page, Jeff Dawson and myself, we were it, and we did the lot.
I have to come and do a photograph with you, I believe, or with something around there.
I knew Nicholas and Donnie McCormack because we were all neighbours, becoming almost a job for the boys, for the Cooper's Lane crew. And so, yeah, in the early days I was working 3 days a week, running around, selling a bit of advertising. And within 18 months or so, we were all working 70 hours a week. It became the kind of job where you didn't really need a home. Ended up in the office till all hours of the night. When we first were doing the newspaper, Nicholas was taking most of the photographs, and they were, none of us could do it, could take photos really, but they were snapshots. And in 1990, after Mungo had successfully given up smoking with a technique called smoke enders, Nicholas, David and I decided to do the same thing. And with the course, you have to give yourself a present at the end for giving up smoking. Nicholas did a tandem jump out of a plane at Niagara, and I gave myself a camera because I was sick of selling advertising. I'll bring you guys in half a step. Now here is it. Yeah. Good. What else is right? Great. Okay, we're good.
We live in this place and we're watching it grow. We love in this town because there's so much to know. We live in this town and we're feeling the flow. And we're loving this town, doesn't it show?
I don't have to go with.
Each day it's a new town, boy. Each day it's a new town, boy. Times change, here's a new town, boy.
Go back up a little bit.
Times changing, this a new town, boy.
Beautiful. Okay, that's beautiful.
I don't see that my photos should tell a story necessarily, but more that they're a kind of graphic device into what the story is. Just that green building. We've got 3 people.
Move in the mosquito hitting. Should we look at you or the camera?
Look at friends is good, yeah.
Each other?
Actually, this girl, yeah. That's beautiful. As so often happens, I have a bit of a picture in my mind of what I want. But then just as we were leaving, we found another frame that worked so much better than the original idea. And I think like so many things, it's the need to be open to what might happen, what might spontaneously happen, is really important in what I do.
Just 2 crazy guys, then 3 crazy guys, then 4 crazy guys, and 2 crazy women.
In the beginning I was involved in production of the paper because that was my background, but I had to balance that with bringing up 2 children, and it wasn't always easy. It was a bit of a struggle actually. Carol was a friend of David's and myself from years before, and we knew she was very good at typing. She was a speed typist, so the first thing we needed was someone who could type accurately and speedily, and she fitted the bill really well. And she was such a character, larger than life personality. She just fitted in completely, you know, she got completely engulfed in producing the paper with us, and it was a delightful time to have her there. She was great fun. Sometimes very chaotic fun, but she was great fun. She developed into being a journalist, yeah. She got very interested in going out and getting stories, and she got very good at it too.
Got to write a feature.
What tonight?
I can remember so many endless nights of just putting the paper to bed. Out would come about 3 or 4 bottles of red. I couldn't keep up with anybody else, but David and Nick and Carol would be well away having a great old time. But it was a necessary release from the whole stress of trying to get the deadline together. And so it was quite understandable. But once a week, every week for years and years and years, it does take its toll on your health, your family life, and most other things, really.
My parents split up when I was in England travelling, and I would have been about 19 at the time. And I remember, Dave being fairly upset, and but you know, I think that they work together. It's all been sort of, you know, it's one of those things that you just get through it.
And the first one I want to give an award to is what we term the True Believer Award. And the True Believer Award only goes to one category of person by definition, and the True Believer is somebody who actually advertises in the Echo.
I had a very big larrikin streak, a mile wide, between the both of them. And quite a few nights they would, after getting quite chirpy on a couple of bottles of red, going home, particularly one night Carol was, or Nick was driving home, and the police saw them, chased them, and they had a terrific chase down the back streets of Mullumbimby and lost the police somewhere. But he had a lot of traditional values about family and responsibility, which he, you know, very rightly had to continue to support. And so it wasn't really a win-win situation at all, right from the beginning. Plus, the drinking got a bit out of hand as well. I think more on Nick's, well, on both of their parts, but Nick particularly. And probably because Carol suspected right from the start he wasn't ever going to leave his family. Oh, look, it was a really hard thing for Carol, because she really loved Nick deeply, and he really loved her, I suspect.
But he never chose to pursue that relationship on a public level. And I had spoken to Nikki very clearly about his relationship with Carol post Jane and Nikki's separation, and he'd made his the terms of his relationship with her very clear to me, and that didn't include my acknowledging her as his girlfriend or his partner or anything but his lover.
Watching my mother sort of live through and cope with the sort of fairly endless peccadillos and affairs that Nicky had, and obviously, you know, some of the more notoriously long-term ones in terms of people like Carol, was awful. Nicky was everything, you know, you could have ever wished for in terms of being an incredibly fantastic father, and I adored him, and he was just unbelievably fabulous, and giving and emotionally loving and everything. And but you know, the other side of that coin was, of course, that everything he did so fabulously well as a father, he did equally as badly as a husband. He was absolutely terrible as a husband.
Michael. Yeah. Quite a bit of art in there.
And the very first person that we brought on board for the editorial side was Michael MacDonald, who was also extremely overeducated, just like us.
Isn't predilection with two eyes? Dereliction. I think
that tone sort of permeated the paper, and I can understand that it's sometimes a bit irritating, but it's just trying not to always talk down to people, which is the norm, you know.
There's nothing like it in New Zealand, nothing like it, and to an and I suspect that it's probably unique in Australia, you know, where a free community paper has such a high editorial standard. You know, it's got a very cosmopolitan readership, and it chooses to edify its readership rather than give them some sort of dumbed down sausage machine type editorial that's shared between, you know, 5 other newspapers.
And always the bizarre and the inane that we've always been willing to publish. We're a couple of larrikins, David and I, basically, and I think as long as we've kept up that feeling of being a couple of larrikins and having a laugh and having a go, and always prepared to stick it up ourselves, always prepared to publish stuff that sticks it up us or makes fun of us, and that's the great thing, and to try to stay humorous and to try and stay amusing. And Michael MacDonald has, over the years, of course, been a tremendous contributor on that level of his wonderful sense of humour.
His father saw a copy of the paper. His father lived in Ocean Shores, saw a copy of the paper, sent it to him. He got back in touch with me, and he was our overseas correspondent for a couple of months from Tasmania, and he was sending his delightful, whimsical sort of pieces from there. Then, unfortunately, his marriage broke up, and he came back up here. And so Nicholas said, "Oh, well, you must work for us."
I think it's a bit of a cheek to expect someone to be coherent at this hour of the night. As one of the forces for conservatism and sanity in the Echo, don't lie, I've been asked to present the Youth Award for services to youth. Apart from growing old, one of the more scary aspects of living is being young. At least when I was growing up in the 60s, we had the Beatles.
Hello, I'm Michael MacDonald. I'm the editor of The Echo. You could describe The Echo as a meeting place. It's a forum. You know, obviously, the people who write letters to the editors have very strong views, which reflect parts of the community. I don't know, you couldn't say they reflect all parts of the community. There are some people out there who wouldn't write a letter in their lives. All voices should be heard, I think, I don't think one should necessarily believe all voices, but I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said that in a democracy you have the right to hold the wrong opinion. And I think that's the basis I operate on. I don't agree with many of the letters to the editor, for instance, but I print them just the same.
Well, I'm commonly known as Fast Bucks, which is my sort of self-chosen nickname.
I'd like to spontaneously deliver this letter to the editor.
Expecting it. Which I originally chose to put shit on, developers, get-rich-quick developers. I suppose if the Echo wasn't there, I would, be exerting some pressure on the Byron News, but there's no way they would publish, a quarter of what I've said in the Echo. And then, of course, there's Ross Tucker's Saturday Star, where nobody but Ross Tucker gets any say at all.
We're small, we come out once a month, we just put our points of view across. And the genesis of that really was that myself and my partner Harold Ross felt at the time that our point of view, or our role in council, just wasn't getting any coverage. Any coverage it was getting was negative.
The Echo reached rock bottom at one time. They would take your press release and the other side's press release, and that would be the news. That would be their analysis, and that really annoyed me. And so I'm constantly trying to stir them up about that kind of thing.
Well, I like the letters for the debate. Even though Fast Bucks annoys the hell out of me, I find it invigorating and stimulating.
Religiously read the letters. That is an essential part. Even down to the part of the letters that they didn't print this week.
The letters give me a good idea on what's going on, what people are thinking, and what's happening in the town.
The letters anger me a great deal, and I don't know why they print some of the garbage opinions of these nonsense, non-thinking people, because some of us have got a brain out here and we want to read real opinions, not just some nong shooting off it.
I love the letters page. I like hearing people's opinions. Sometimes the debates are quite funny, they go on for a few weeks.
I read the letters interest me quite easily.
I would have to say the letter to the editor section.
Yes, I think the letters are good, but I think they need editing. It keeps the community alive, it keeps the voices alive, and that's absolutely excellent.
The letters are giving a voice to all the opposing opinions about all the development that happens in this region, because it's so sought after. There's always somebody wanting to create development, and there's always a whole lot of people opposed to it.
And some people are quite loopy, but I love the eccentrics and the maddies, and then within that there's, some real gems. Sometimes the maddies aren't mad, and the ones that don't look mad are mad. It's community voice. There's just so much to say. Yeah, and I think community radio and a newspaper like the Echo are vital, to the health. It just shows how healthy we are.
I must admit I do have a look to see what Mandy Nolan has had to say. More often than not, I get a real laugh out of what she's put in the paper, and it seems to often be quite pertinent to what's happening around the place.
Mandy Nolan is my name, for those of you not familiar. I'm the entertainment editor of the Echo, which is a very fancy word for basically going through about 300 emails a week and working out what's on and what's not. I also compile, with the help from my ladies on the front desk, from Flick and Anara, the gig guide. The entertainment section and the gig guide is probably, if you're running a gig around the area, if you don't have it in the Echo, then chances are not many people will turn up. What's a seamless shirt anyway?
I don't know how she juggles her life at all. She has, thousands of children and thousands of jobs, and she keeps all these balls in the air at the same time. and she's funny while she does it. She's an incredible worker. She's somewhere beneath all that black and strange humour. There's a very straight person with a work ethic, I think.
I always get dressed every day, but like, even when I'm at home all day, it's kind of like, I think it's the bare minimum you can do. It helps when you're an older mother too, you do have to, you know. You don't want to look old and really wrecked. Keep the illusion up. We don't do more than that though. Anything more than that would be excessive. I paint. I've just recently had an exhibition. I teach adult education, meaning I teach stand-up comedy. That's one night a week. I run about 5 comedy rooms from various clubs. I've got a club at the Byron RSL, the Currumbin RSL, the Ballina RSL. And now at the Lismore Uni Bar. I run the Courthouse in Mullum. So they're like open mic rooms, just comedy rooms that I MC and book.
It really reflects on me, so I encourage them not to turn up. I've got a reputation, I'm a businesswoman these days, and I can't have people looking like shit. Because they'll say, I'm not doing that Mandy Nolan course, those people were shit, so the shit people aren't here.
The jobs in between, I'm teaching comedy to people with dementia. I'm writing a book at the moment. Look, what do you think of Mummy's writing? Oh! See? It's your youngest readers you've got to bring in all the time. Soapbox is just a humorous kind of opinion piece. It's about the only paper, I think, in the country that would let me say fuck. It's not particularly that's the most important thing, but it shows you how liberal the Echo actually is. I don't go out of my way to swear in it, but there are times when it's appropriate. There's not much you can't write about in the Echo, and I've certainly pushed that.
I love reading Mandy's column. I think somewhere in her humour, all of us can relate to where she's coming from.
I have to read Mandy Nolan's column every week because I just love her.
Well, she's fun. She's always a fun read, a lively column.
I read The Funny Woman sometimes. What's her name?
Oh, I love Mandy. Give her 10 points for putting all of that together every week.
It is really challenging as she's getting older, and I like to keep the kids with me till they're at least 2. I don't like putting them in any early daycare or anything. I don't know how I get anything done. I couldn't tell you, because I get these windows of time. Obviously I don't do the housework. You look around in my house, you'll see I don't do the housework because it's the last thing on my agenda. Oh, it's good. Straight onto the youth issues. She's looking for the gig guide.
In particular, I guess Mandy's always one for humour, and Mungo is certainly one for taking things a bit serious at times.
Mungo sometimes.
And Mungo's column I really love.
I read Mungo. He's not alright. Like all them journalists.
Politics is a very important thing. I've always said politics is the most important invention of the human race because it's the only way we solve disputes without killing each other. Yes, that's my daughter Gail. Was Gough, which I keep. It's what I write about. I write books about it. I write commentaries for other papers from time to time about it. I do television and so on. I brought it unashamedly into the Echo because I know politics is something that's not a popular subject and it's not something people want to spend a lot of time on, but if you can introduce them to the funny side of it and the entertaining side of it, perhaps they'll start looking at the rest as well. Well, I'd been in Canberra for 20 years and I was a senior political correspondent and commentator. Frankly, I was getting stale. I'd seen it all before and done it all before. And I'd been planning to move in this direction sooner or later anyway, but the final straw was the new Parliament House. I just couldn't stand the idea of moving into that huge museum mausoleum, as indeed it's turned out to be. For the first time we came up here for a holiday, I was recognised by somebody who worked for the Echo, by Jeff Dawson, as a matter of fact, and they asked me to go to the Echo Awards night, which happened to be at the week we were up here. So I went along there and presented a prize and made a little speech and so on, and thought, this is it, this is where I've got to come back to. I remember I won a limerick competition. They were serving rather bad wines, and I wrote a limerick which said, I long for the day when the Echo can run to a wine that's more secco. What the paper affords for this evening's awards resembles the piss of a gecko. Apart from that, we were just dead lucky. We didn't really think about what sort of community we were moving into. We just looked at the superficial stuff. But of course we struck it absolutely lucky with Byron Shire and the Echo and all the things around it. I think the first thing was incredulity at the classified ads, as a lot of people's is, particularly the health pages. You know, all these people channeling archangels and so on. I found this a bit off the air. But I realised very quickly that as a community paper, it was first class. I mean, you could say it's a greenish paper, but not to the exclusion of everybody else. It doesn't rant and rave and preach all the time. And it genuinely does try, and usually succeeds, in being the voice of the community.
One of the great things the Echo has done is to raise the level of local government reporting to a new plane, for which the council itself doesn't thank me at all. They have a very, very poor attitude towards that in the main.
I was of the very strong view that the Echo was very biased against sort of the views I held. And I just remember saying to Nick, well, you show me. I said, because I will be able to show you all the negative stuff, but I don't recall seeing the positive stuff. His response to that was, we're at the RSL club, his response to that was, well, give me a hug. And my response to that was, keep printing the bad stuff, Nick, but there's no hugging, all right?
Well, at a local level, council's very important in terms of controlling development because it puts the planning regulations in place, but being a creature of state government, it's often stymied to the degree that it can control development. Though this council, this shire, has been particularly successful in, for instance, keeping the number of stories on a building down, which has slowed down development. So we initially focused on council because there wasn't really anybody that was doing that, and the other papers have followed on from there.
We live in this place and we're watching it grow. We love in this place and there's so much to know. We live in this town, feel the pulse grow. We're loving this town, doesn't it show? Each day it's a new town, boy. Times change here, the new sounds, boy. Each day it's a new town, boy. Each day it's a new town, boy.
Well, apparently they behave better when the media's sitting here than when the media's gone away. People want to know what their money's being spent on, basically, so if we can give them some overview of where it's going, it's a good idea, and to point out some anomalies if there are any.
Always my main driving force has been social issues, the social issues, the caring. To me, there is only one basis of caring in life, and that is the person at the bottom of the heap. You have to care for the person at the bottom of the heap. If we as a society look after the person at the bottom of the heap and pull that person out and bring them up a bit, then we're fulfilling the basic role and the basic sort of humanitarian need. I wish we could do that on a global scale. I really do. And that's where I'd like to go next if I can.
They certainly support lots of things that we've done down here at the Youth Activities Centre and all the fundraising projects we have, and projects with young people, you know, there's always, if you send in an article, they're going to publish it for you.
There was the question of expressing opinions in this newspaper that were going to upset our advertisers. And we had obviously some pretty, how shall I put it, you know, right of centre advertisers, some pretty traditional people out there who were advertising with us, but didn't exactly want to hear that we were, you know, in favour of marijuana or legalisation or anything like that. Or inevitably, the time came when, you know, I'd write something in the paper that my advertisers didn't like.
So very often he would get knockback saying, "Well, I don't like your paper. I don't like what you have to say." But he would always make the point that you don't have to worry what I say. What you have to worry about is whether people read it, because if they read it, they will also read your advertisement.
When it comes to the decision, there's been a couple of times when it's been like, do we run this story or do we say this if it's at risk of losing an advertiser? Every other newspaper in the country will basically go, no, you know, look, pull it in, don't run that. The Echo, through their editorial policy, will always run stories that make it financially difficult for them. They're always offending their biggest advertisers.
Ironically, we actually owe a huge debt to Mallams, John Waterhouse and Mallams, for committing to taking advertising every week in those early Echoes. Come back to bite him on the bum a bit, because he feels that we have engineered and piloted the anti-Woolworths campaign. Of course, he sold his supermarkets to Woolworths to give them the entree into Mullumbimby. So now, unfortunately for him, the organ that he so generously fostered has bitten the hand that fed us.
Woolworths promotes a multinational industrial food market, or should I say farmers market.
I'm fourth generation here, along with the Mellon family, who've seen many changes occur, but not many that made me happier.
With the imminent Woolworths as our town centrepiece, we'll have to change our welcome sign. How about just another?
Please allow me to be among the first to actively encourage Woolworths to hasten their presence.
I don't want to live in a community that has cheaper chips and Coke and bananas that taste
Go
like
for it,
shit.
Woolies, and boast about it all over the country.
I reckon they're
We'll even
pretending
help
when they
you.
call themselves the fresh food people.
Mallams has
How many
exploited
times
its
have you
local
heard the stories
credentials
of
to the
farmers being
maximum,
seduced and
and
then
then
screwed
taken
by
the community
Woolworths?
for a
Does
ride by
actually.
selling
I would
out
like
the
to know
Woolies.
who on that
Mullumbimby
What
panel
should
has
we
an
be
opportunity
thinking?
to totally.
I think the Woolies debate did divide more than previously, because it was about Mullum. Mullum has had a status as being the refuge for community. Byron Bay's been the tourist town where things happen, you know, the development takes place. So I think there was a very deep commitment to trying to retain Mullumbimby as, you know, the beautiful small country town with local businesses, and to not have to deal with that corporate takeover.
So over the years we've renovated and put in as much new and modern stuff as we can, but it's far too cramped. The aisles, everything that we do.
And can I say, the Echo is not alone in, I believe, showing too much of the one side and the anti-Woolworths. I've had discussions with the editor of the Northern Star. I've talked to Alf at the Byron News. People like controversy, and people tend to focus on that, get people to read their newspaper. And I think all of the newspapers, but the Echo in particular, have shown us too much of the one side and not shown a fair representation from both sides.
So once again, very cramped conditions. Right here.
And we did actually stop advertising with the Echo, I guess 12 months or so, perhaps 18 months ago.
Hey? Yeah, he doesn't talk to me.
I suppose we've upset a number of advertisers over the years. People have a right to advertise where they want, and you know, it's one way of expressing your opinion, I suppose.
Not everyone's going to like the Echo, but I think it's really hard for people not to read, even when they don't agree with what's in there. Even the people that don't like the Echo, I know they sit down and secretly read it.
And sometimes it's nice to read things that are sort of perhaps not what you believe in or anti what you're doing. And of course I read it a lot lately because I always go straight to the letters to the editor to see who's having a go at.
I pretty much read everything what's in it. Since I've been here, which is 14 years, yeah, I've always read the Echo.
I love the Seven. I love finding out what's happening around town. Yeah, and you know what gigs there are. And I like the horoscopes.
Yeah, I just really like it. The Echo, it's great.
Just to find out the goss.
Well, always the sports section, yeah, always the sports. Has the draw for golf. Oh yeah, everything, yeah. I miss it when I don't get it. Yes, I do.
I don't know, I'm more into reading magazines and that.
I go front page, letters, and then backlash. And then I go backwards.
Well, I can't imagine Mullumbimby in the area without it.
Having an avid readership and a cantankerous readership has been vital to our work. But it's also because we love what we're doing, you know. It's a love-hate relationship with what we're doing. It gets difficult and tedious at times meeting a weekly deadline, but at the same time there's a lot of fun involved. Journalists are very interesting, very much eccentric people. The production staff are wonderful, the artists are all mad. A lot of what goes on in the paper successfully can be directed to Ziggy, the production manager, who is absolutely brilliant, and we're very lucky to have him. Someone's got to be organised, and fortunately he's the man that's organised. We're very lucky at the moment. We've got 3 very good photographers on staff, which is quite incredible in a small town. Working with really nice, crazy people who have fabulous senses of humour, slightly offbeat, and who are incredibly good at their jobs. You know, I appreciate that. Just from the technical side of people, we're blessed with wonderful workers.
Distribution about 21,000 copies a week, and you know, we go all through Byron and Mullumbimby and up into the hills.
Most of the fun was in those first 10 years, you know, where we were basically breaking all the rules for how to make a successful publication, breaking all the rules for journalism, you know, and just generally having a lot of fun.
You buy a classified and the phone number's wrong. You write a letter and we say it's too long. Can't write the fire, it's left in the rain. Say something once, why should I say it again? Yes, I'm a echo worker, underpaid. My real life seems to get in the way. I better run, I better run away.
I mean, the first 10 years were a real slog and a real grind, both financially and for technical reasons. And Nicholas Shan was hugely courageous is perhaps the best word for taking it on.
The newspaper used to get out every week, and I used to say to Nick, why on earth have you begun this, which you have to do something, get something out every single week? Do you realise what you've begun? And Tom Mooney used to come over and say, oh yes, Nick, you've got to keep this up, this is wonderful what you're doing, the whole Shah needs it. And the Echo got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the advertising got more expensive and more expensive and more expensive.
It was, you know, your classic Echo kind of day. We were all down at Brunswick Heads, seafood restaurant down near the bridge. Big afternoon, sort of red wine and discussions and big ideas and lots of fun, bonhomie. And I said, well, you know, you're way too drunk to drive, you know, there's just no way I'm letting you drive a car. And he said, that's fine, you drive, and just threw me the keys. So Nicky got in the back with a beer, had half a dozen beers with him, as he was wont to do, and lay down the back seat. Saffron got in the front with me, and he said, yeah, right, come on, I want to be chauffeured home by my two sons, let's go. And we drove out up Main Arm to Cooper's Lane, and turned into Cooper's Lane, and he said, oh, stop the car. And I said, oh, why? He said, oh, I want to get out and sit on the bonnet, which is something that ever since I was a little kid, you know, when we turned into Cooper's Lane, we'd say, Nick, you need to stop, we want to sit on the bar, we want to sit on the bonnet, we want to sit on the bonnet. And he'd allow us to get out and sit in the bonnet, and we'd drive up Cooper's Lane to the house here while we were sitting on the bonnet. I said, oh, what do you want to do that for? He said, oh, it's a beautiful moonlit night and I want to feel a wind in my hair. And I went, okay.
And he was really happy that night because he was coming home with his two sons, and, you know, everyone had tried to persuade him to stay in town, and he'd gone, no, I'm going home, I have my sons, we are, you know, he wanted to go home and be in his space with his children.
So I pulled over, and he got out and got up on the bonnet, and we set off again. And as we came down Cooper's Lane, we were going around the bend, and the right-hand side wheels of the car just touched the verge, and it sort of, I remember it sort of startled me slightly, and I just touched the brake for a second, and we're only going about 40 kilometres an hour probably, and he just slid straight off this happened very fast. He just slid straight off the bonnet, and then we went right over the top of him. It was all, you know, over in an instant. It was sort of that's the sort of thing that in a moment can occur, and, you know, you're forever sort of bound to live with that and sort of and deal with it. So, you know, it's still that far away from me even now. It was a pretty horrific sort of moment in my life, as you know, he was not just my father on a lot of levels. He was my confidant. He was the person I always turned to if things were not going well in my life. Yeah, it was my closest friend, as well as sort of, you know, being my father, is the person that, you know, I sort of measured myself against on so many levels. And there was plenty of consequences that flow from that in my life, and in the lives of, obviously, you know, quite a few people.
Cavorting, carousing, courting death on more than one occasion, magistrates please note. Tilting at windmills sometimes, but more often at genuine dragons. Nicholas has written his last line, and it is still hard to believe, much less to bear.
Sebastian I just think Sebastian carries that guilt and will always carry that guilt, and for a long time had difficulty even looking at me or my brother or my mother because of that.
Well, it was a shit thing to happen to Sebastian.
They'd had the head of the Crown prosecution run the case because they were a bit concerned that it would become a media case and might get a lot of airing in the media. And the Crown prosecutor basically got up and said, there's nothing you can do to this person that is going to make them suffer any more than they've already suffered. And it was the things that his own barrister couldn't say. They recommended community service, and I think that was really important that he did do his community service and be given community service, because it gave him an opportunity to feel that he'd paid back something for what had happened. Because although it was a tragic accident, he inevitably was the one driving the car and felt wholly responsible for what had happened. And, you know, there were times I wondered whether or not he would make it through, and I just am so grateful that he did. Yeah, I'm just very grateful that he has been able to live with it and has been able to move forward with his life. He's married and got 2 beautiful children and, you know, has managed to keep going and create a life for himself.
The bastard died on the weekend, and then we had to come back and put out a paper on a Monday. And that was horrific to deal with. And it was just so hard because he was the focus of the paper. And he was a good personal friend of us all. But it was necessary to go on for him. This is the bit where I wave my hand in the air and we cut.
Like everybody else, I loved Nick. And like everybody else, I miss him greatly still. I still think that he left a hole that, with the best of intentions, nobody else has really been able to fill. He was the spirit of the Echo, but when he died, David Lovejoy in particular was willing to pick up the pieces, or try and pick up the pieces and put them together. And he did an extraordinary job in doing so. I didn't expect the Echo to survive Nick's death.
I think the coast of Byron Bay and the beauty of around Mullumbimby and Maynarm and Wilson's Creek, I think that's part of it, but it's not what it is. There's a much more intangible kind of essence of the way people live together and of community that is really hard to articulate. You know, you'll go sit in a cafe and you'll be sitting near some multi-millionaire next to someone on the dole next to... There's a diversity here, and everywhere else felt like walking into a monoculture. It was like living in a macadamia farm as opposed to living in a forest. And this really feels like, you know, forest people in the sense there is that, you know, there's that incredible diversity of who we are as people that makes it such a rich and incredibly fertile place for creativity and expression.
And there's lots of very spirited and passionate people out there, and it's not just an artistic community or a business community, but it's kind of a combination of lots of different things.
And we're in a bubble. There's not a lot of you know, population base close to us, so we're sort of like Tweed's half an hour, Balliner's half an hour, so you know, we've got a good sense of distance between us and the rest of the world, it seems. And people come here because it's unique.
I can tell you very definitely that the Echo is a product of its community, much more than a product of its creators. When we tried to start an Echo in Lismore with exactly the same principles and philosophies and content, people didn't like it.
Never got any support from the community. They just sat out there in their hands waiting for us to do it all. So, yeah, community newspaper didn't happen on that level over there. And that's, again, what's so truly remarkable about this shire. It is quite extraordinary.
People love it or they hate it or they fall in and out of love with it over time or whatever, but it is still, you know, a very vibrant reflection of the incredible lexicon of views that exist, you know, in Byron Shire. 25 years. I mean, gee, what a marriage of the community and the Echo. They've been together for 25 years, and at a lot of levels, it is like a marriage. The way that the Echo debates and argues and fights with the people on the council, and there are plenty of analogies we could draw there about the Echo and its marriage to the community of Byron Shire, and I think Nikki would be pretty pleased about that.